Welcome to this panel on the Environment and Feminist Responses. I'm Subina Shrestha, your moderator for this panel. I'm a journalist and a filmmaker from Nepal. We've been living in unusual times. The norms before March has been replaced by a new norm. I mean, do you remember what happened in the beginning of the year? There was a bushfire in Australia. Conversations on climate change had felt really urgent around that time. And remember, like towards the end of 2019, when school children around the world were like protesting to pressure global leaders to ensure a safe future for them by reversing global warming. Like my kids, who are now 8 and 10, were on the street with placards as well. And at one point, my son told me then that they are not as lucky as me, for they are convinced that they're going to die at the age of 30, and I got to live longer. And at that time, climate change felt super urgent. Right now, emissions have gone down, but only by a little bit, with measures to control COVID-19. But is this just a blip? Or have we learned enough, or are we going to rush back to our old ways? Last year, scientists released a report warning that by the year 2100, a third of all glaciers in the Hindu Kush Himalayan region would have melted. That's going to impact all of us. 2 million people will be affected by this. All our countries will be impacted. And this is the best case scenario, said the report. Scientists warn that if emissions are not cut, it could be 2/3 of the glaciers which are going to be lost. We've been warned of an impending humanitarian crisis from water wars and mass migration. We've seen natural disasters from cyclones, floods to droughts, and even now a pandemic that are just not just changes in climate cycles, but caused by human activity. So I Googled disaster and women and found a 2012 World Bank study. I did not know that 70% of those who lost their lives in the 2005 Indian tsunami were women. And a while ago, I visited this village in far western Nepal where there was a severe drought. The women looked dreadfully malnourished. And it took me a while to realize that they were the last ones to eat, even if they were breastfeeding. And many of them went to bed hungry. And in my years of reporting, I've heard stories of rain and snowfall patterns changing and water sources drying. And fetching water in most of South Asia happens to be a very gendered job. And the longer the women take to find water, the less time she has to do her work. So to discuss these issues, the role of women in environmental activism, we have a team of women who are leading the battle for environmental sustainability. We'll hear about the experiences and the challenges that our environment is facing and how we can promote biodiversity in the natural habitat and sustainable economic development practices. And how should we be thinking about the impact of COVID-19 on these issues? We have with us Dr. Fozia from the Khyber village in Hunza in the north of Pakistan, where she grew up very close to nature, where she says local practices were seen as wholesome. Food was produced and consumed locally. The electricity at home was zero carbon because it was hydro, and the communities generally generated very little waste. So after high school, she chose environmental sciences, specifically on human interaction with the environment. While at university in Pakistan, she got involved in environmental activism and managed to push her university to be plastic-free. She's got a DPhil from Oxford, where she looked at membrane technology for water treatment. I'm sure she'll explain all of that much later. She now teaches at the Center for Water Informatics and Technology, WIT, that's in Lahore University of Management Science. And her research focuses on waste management and the interaction of solid waste with wastewater. We have Sharmind Neelormi, sorry if I pronounce it wrong, from Bangladesh, who's an economist and an expert on gender justice and climate change. Now, her story will resonate with so many of us. Like Sharmind didn't start by being a powerhouse that she is now. So after university, she did what so many of us do all the time, got married, had a child, and her daughter had autism. And as a primary caregiver, Sharmind's work-life balance was thrown aside. And many of us who are mothers can totally understand that. And you can very well imagine the added challenges And as many of us can relate to, especially now that isolation and struggle sent her into depression, and writing and academic inquiry really helped her get out of it. So when she started, like whenever she could, she started traveling and interacting with people from rural communities, often carrying her daughter with her. So moved by the stories of people, she started writing more. She and her husband, a climate scientist, formed a team, and her journey to climate activism started. So Sharmind now has been, she's teaching economics at Jahangirnagar University, Savar, in Bangladesh since 1995 with a focus on environmental economics, climate change, vulnerability, disaster risk reduction, and gender. She's contributed to intergovernmental panels on climate change's fifth assessment report, and has advised the Bangladeshi Ministry of Environment and Forest and Department of Women's Affairs in formulating policies on gender issues related to climate change impact in Bangladesh. And she's led a nationwide campaign on sustainable rural life, and she's like built these climate tribunals, climate tribunals, which I'm sure she's going to talk more about. And she's also been advising the Bangladeshi parliament on the LDC's positions on what to negotiate in the UN climate negotiation processes. Earlier, I also talked to Laxmi Gurung. She's from Nepal. Laxmi is a tourism entrepreneur who still lives in her native village of Kagbeni, which is in the Annapurna region. Now, Kagbeni is in Mustang, a district that is traditionally on the salt trade route. So men used to travel all the time, and women managed absolutely everything else. And with global warming, Kagbeni and her village, along with the region, are in the front lines of climate change. So Laxmi did a master's in tourism and hotel management from Lincoln University. Her master's thesis paper was on sustainable tourism and agriculture in Kagbeni, her village. She's been active in a community where she's been promoting agriculture-based sustainable tourism. I'm so pleased to share this panel with the three of you. In the next section, each panelist will introduce their work to counter the effects of climate change, promote biodiversity in the natural habitat, sustainable economic practices, water, and also, they're also going to touch a little bit upon like how does environmental change impact men and women differently in their particular specific fields. If we could do that in the order, like I introduced you from Dr. Fozia to Sharmind and then Laxmi, that'd be great. Should we start with Dr. Fozia, please?
Thank you, Subina, for such a kind introduction. Very honored to be a part of this panel. My name is Fozia, as you know, and I'm an environmental activist and environmental researcher, and I belong to Hunza. As Subina mentioned, I grew up in a society that was very close to nature. As I was growing up, we built the microhydel power project. My village was also a pioneer in ibex conservation, and we started trophy hunting in this part of the world, which is very new. Prior to that, we were just excessively hunting the ibex population. It had come down. That and the agriculture and the food and all of those things that you mentioned. So it built that connection that I have with nature, and then eventually led for me to become an environmental sciences major in my undergrad, my MS, and eventually in my DPhil, I did the membrane technology for wastewater treatment and converted it into a clean drinking water. The two technologies that I use, which are called membrane distillation and forward osmosis, are said to be less energy intensive. So I think they have a huge role to play in future when we run out or when we become a water scarce country. As we know that Pakistan, despite having plenty of surface water, has now become a water scarce country, and we are running into several problems with reference to water. So that, and during this journey, I of course explored all the areas that I could, and by being from a rural setting and then studying in an urban setting gave me that broader perspective about environment. And of course, as you mentioned, the women in the rural climates have a different role. So when I was growing up, my cousins used to bring water because we didn't have a water supply, but as I was growing up, that changed. So we had a proper water supply system, you know, and a lot of things improved. But when I went to the cities and I saw the lifestyle there of having lavish lifestyle, luxury cars, more resources, more wastewater, lesser treatment, because here we have septic tanks where we treat wastewater, whereas there was open canals where the wastewater was dumped into. So all of that was just so eye-opening for me that in the process I learned, and I also decided to teach others, because I realized that many people do not take all of these into account. Since I've come back from Oxford, because my study there unfortunately could not be implemented here straight away, so I decided to start with something simple and basic. So when I came back to my hometown with the Environmental Protection Agency here, we the thing that you talked about, where I made my campus plastic free, I had a dream of making my village plastic free as well, because my village has a legacy of making environmental conservation projects successful. So when I came here and I spoke to them, I realized that the Environmental Conservation and Environmental Protection Agency is already thinking about doing it. So with them, I was able to make my village one of the first villages in Upper Hunza to adopt a ban on polyethylene bag use. And after that, when I joined LUMS, I had, of course, to choose where do I want to put my research skills into. And I chose microplastic pollution because I wanted it to relate to my activism. So my activism was mostly towards not trashing, reducing plastic use, reducing consumerism, and then eventually, of course, reducing the solid waste pollution. And I think that in Pakistan and in countries like Pakistan, there is a strong relation between solid waste management and wastewater management. And microplastic pollution sort of gave me that space where I could use something that I'm campaigning about with something that I actively research on. So I used microplastic pollution research for my initial study. And then while I was doing that, I realized that in the urban setting that it was too urban and too academic elite for me. And then I decided that I needed to go into the ground to see what's happening around the city, a city which is very happy and lively like Lahore. You tend to forget people around you who could be living a marginalized life. And because I was working on plastic pollution reduction, I then chose to work with this community of waste scavengers with an initiative, which is a women initiative in LUMS actually, who funded this, where I work now with female waste scavengers in Lahore who cater to the areas where the local authority is not catering to. So that has been another aspect of the study, which is of course very overwhelming. I learn something new every day, and I learn that how we've mismanaged not only environment, but the human interactions and the human lifestyle as well. And that rich-poor divide and that elite marginalized divide is so obvious. And you understand the term environmental intersectionality very well, on how we are not only just exploiting our environment, but also at times the human interactions within it.
Thank you. Dr. Sharmind, if you can expand a little bit more. I mean, I think what you just said, like about the vulnerabilities, I mean, even in the times of COVID, we have seen that the most vulnerable are the ones who are the most impacted, and I assume that's the same for the most vulnerable in all communities. Dr. Sharmind, please, if you could.
Thank you, Subina, and thank you for a nice introduction. And it's great meeting all the energized and inspiring women from South Asia. As you said, I actually born and brought up in a university campus where my parents worked, and that was with Lash Green, open spaces, and all that. I was a good score student, and after my masters, I entered in teaching and dreamt of going abroad, having a good degree and come back. I was involved in student politics as well, so I always had a dream of serving common people. Having that in mind, I started my journey in professional career. And just after my joining in the university, I got married. Then we had a child. And in that journey, my husband is a climate change scientist, and he helped me a lot. Uh, in early 2000, in climate change discourse, there is hardly any human face. Actually, that was all driven by science. The whole IPCC process, the whole climate negotiation, and the whole publication area for climate change, that was actually driven by uh, crude science. There was no human face. So when we teamed up, we actually, he briefed me on the science, why something is going wrong, what will be the projections, what is the sign behind, for example, the salinity, the storm surges, the heat waves, and all that. And I could see the human faces, and we started traveling across the country. And actually, I packed my daughter, and three of us moved in a major way all over the country. And Bangladesh being a small delta, we have been, experiencing different hydrogeophysical realities in different parts of the country, and that made me understood that. Uh, you know Salinity is impacting in a major way. Other area drought is impacting in another way, and all that. Now the question remains, what you, Sabine, you asked, how weather can be gendered. In early 2000, believe me, there was no such documentation that whether the vulnerability was differential among men and women. How climate change can bring differential impacts to men and women. So we started exploring and documenting how the vulnerabilities can be different in terms of disaster response, in terms of climate change response. Uh, just to note you that in 1991 we had a great cyclone where we lost 0.3 million people, and 90% of the deceased were female, and that could explain how vulnerable women can be in in the time of extreme weather events, in times of disaster, even in slow onset disaster like salinity. So we documented the first ever global synthesis on climate vulnerability, and brought gender dimension in it, and the Bangladesh government actually patronized the whole work, and we published on behalf of Bangladesh government. And that was noticed by the UNFCCC process, and I was linked after that with the global women activist groups like Gender CC, Gender and Climate Change Network, Women for Climate Justice in 2007. And we started our journey in climate negotiation in the UNFCCC process. And you can remember that, Sabine, I can tell you that before 2007 Conference of the Parties is COP13, before that, the human dimension in climate change was missing. And it's people like us who went to Bali that year. The Conference of the Parties was held in Bali, and we demonstrated, documented, and we tried to attract the policymakers, different country party members, that you need to flag the vulnerabilities faced by men and women, the indigenous communities, the disabilities, and we started our journey from there. And I can tell you that the Women and Gender constituency, the space created in the climate change negotiation, we were actually the influencer to constitute that constituency. This constituency actually provides the women activists the space in climate negotiation to flag the issues concerning gender, women, and other minority groups. And UNFCCC Secretariat actually asks recommendation from this constituency that what should be done, for more women and for more other vulnerable communities. So that's how it started. Then I got involved in a nationwide campaign that was on agriculture and climate change. And that campaign actually formulated different campaign materials. Climate Tribunal, the first ever climate tribunal that we hosted. And then my research was with vulnerable communities. I worked with climate change adaptation, and community-based adaptation is my interest. I work with communities, how the resistance is growing, how the resilience is growing. So yeah, that's how I link my research with communities, with the global communities, with the local communities, and I try to influence the local parliamentary members and the top policy makers with my research outputs, and I brief them with LDC negotiation points on a regular basis before going to COP process. Last, for that matter, in this round, that being an academician from a third world, I don't believe that I set aside all my activities and I keep on just writing and publishing papers in peer-reviewed journals. My research needs to be connected with activism, and that's why I connect my academic life and research learning to activism. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, right now, it just feels like everyone has to be a climate activist. Earlier, we checked with Laxmi's internet, and we found out that we had some issues. She is in Gagbeni, and I believe that the internet's not that great right now. But we did earlier record a video where she's explained what she's been doing. So we can try that now, and if internet does get better, we can go back into asking a few questions.
Thank you, Subina. Namaste. At the moment, I am in Mustang, a mountain region of Nepal. After graduating from Lincoln University, New Zealand, I returned back to my roots in 2014 to serve my nation, to my community, and to look after my family-owned farm and a business. Today, I am very happy to work with nearly 3,000 people, farmers, women, entrepreneurs in the region, and happily living with the nature. Geographically, Mustang is Trans-Himalaya regions with minimum rainfall. Agriculture is predominating occupation, and tourism contemporary livelihood. We were connected to road access in 2006. Before that, we were isolated from the rest of the world. At present, with the pandemic and lockdown, we are feeling the same. Touch wood, we still have no case of COVID-19 in Mustang. During lockdown, our tourism and other businesses are highly affected, but our traditional agriculture activities has not been affected, and it's almost the time for harvesting also. And though lockdown has affected us economically, but our environment is healing, which is, I find, a very nice part of the COVID-19. The role as a being of the woman, I would like to add a little bit of a role of women in Mustang. The role of a woman plays important in all walks of life in Mustang, from the time of salt trade to COVID-19 pandemic. Their roles as like homemakers, caretakers, farmers, entrepreneurs, nature and culture conservationist, problem solver, labor worker, chef, and a maid. When their male counterpart leaves for trade. Though women are main economic contributor in the family. They were never eligible for making decision in the family or community matters in this customary rule of patriarchy society in Mustang. And Subina, I believe it will take ages to change this system. And also another pattern we seeing is climate change here in Mustang, being in Mustang, and we can see a rapid change are happening in climate change. Like for example, when I was a kid, say around 30 years back, we had only two crops, that is barley and buckwheat. But now anything put under the ground, it will grow. So this is indications that weather is getting warmer. I had never seen flowers in the winter in the past, but now you can see a marigold all around in Mustang in the month of December. And this is also a threat to the traditional crop that possible of losing traditional crops and going for new crops. And another example is also a village in Upper Mustang that is called Dey, which is relocated. The settlement is relocated because of water scarcity due to climate change. So in this case, like there is a possible moving to keeping everything and moving to the next new places will be possible of losing the sense of places. And in 2018 August, we had continuous rainfall for a month, and that was unusual because we have hardly rains in the Mustang, and this has damages our mud city heritage and farmlands, mud houses, farmlands and bridges that connected the other villages. So these are also negative impact for our culture and heritage sites. In 2014, the impact of Hudhud was also felt here in Mustang, which was turned into a snowstorm, taking nearly 100 trekkers' lives in our mountains. So these are the few of the examples of climate change that is been noticed in Mustang. And if these climate changes are happening, our mountains will be gone, and our ancestral belongings will be gone, and our livelihood will be, our traditional livelihood will be disappear, and there will be a big question: what will we hand over to the next generations? And this worries me a lot and becomes a serious issues. This is not issues of myself, my community, my country, but this is the issues of global. So I think we should all need to address it and work together to save our planet. Thank you.
Thank you all. I'd also asked Laxmi earlier about the impacts of COVID in her region and what it has meant for women and climate around there.
Well, Subina, the impact of COVID-19 is a nightmare to us and our mankind. Most of our daily activities has been affected, and no business, no movement of people, locked down for nearly 3 months, and our life has been affected, our no social life, and this has affected economically, psychologically and physically. But the positive side of the COVID-19 is that it has stopped mankind from doing activities that are harming environment more. This has helped our natural habitat and environment to regenerate and regrowth, and which we failed to do so since long time. In my opinion, for new normal, it's that we need to follow now. It's time to follow us 3 pillars of sustainable development, also known as 3 E's. That is environment, equity and economics. If we implement these 3 E's, in a balanced way and do any kind of business or in the field of development or work, I think it will be sustained for long term. With this, I would like to thank you so much.
So going back into talking to all of you, I'm going to ask a question to Dr. Fozia. I mean, are scientists and women scientists the same? I mean, the fact that you're called a woman scientist already, I mean, does it make a difference in your work? I mean, and do you get explained to?
That's a great question. A part of me wants to say that there's no difference between a male researcher and a female researcher, and that a scientist is a scientist. We generally never take our gender as an excuse to not go into the field and work in the field. But that said, as I was doing my undergrad and master's, I have seen certain supervisors suggest a certain topic to the female researchers. They say, you don't want to go into the field. Why don't you just do this questionnaire online or do this and that, and let's get you done with it. And sometimes it's a request from the female researcher side as well. So that's one part of it. And of course, it comes more from our culture and our backgrounds. But I would like to mention one thing, that now that I am in one of the top universities in Pakistan, when I started my work on microplastic research, I wanted to do it because it felt the right thing to do. No one has quantified microplastic in Pakistan, and it's sort of related to my overall scheme of research. When I told people that I want to do it, most of the male colleagues would ask me, but why do you want to do it? Why does it matter? Because for them, the problems are bigger and broader, and the solutions are bigger and broader as well. Whereas the intricacies to which a female scientist can go, I don't think male scientists have the tendency to go towards that. So they said, if microplastic can pass on through your feces, why do you worry about it? And then I had to explain that because plastics can absorb toxic chemicals, maybe it can harm you, maybe it can harm the biology or the ecosystem in the water streams. But moments like those, and generally, for example, when I present and come back, because in my everyday life, I'm a very common person. So my discussion never becomes too scientific for people. So sometimes when I present and come back, people do ask me that, oh, we did not expect you to give such a technical presentation. And that's when, I just sit and say, oh, what should I do about this? Should I be more technical other than my technical talks, or should I be less technical in my talks? Like, how do you go about it? So part of it would say absolutely nothing, that a scientist is a scientist whose work is to research. But I think part of me wants to insert here slightly that there are all those biases that come with our culture, with the areas that we are from, which you cannot just take away like that.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose like people just imagine a scientist being a man and they're completely thrown aback. And what you said, like, whether you should be more personable or more technical, I don't think there's ever a right answer. I mean, whatever you do, you're going to get fingers pointed at some point or the other, I assume. Sharmind, you've been like talking to governments, trying to explain to the governments what they should be doing. How do you find the responses? How difficult is it? And what are some of the pushback that you get?
Thank you for asking that critical question. I say it critical. I don't say that government is not responsive. Neither I say that they're responsive. What does that mean? On paper, there are documents, there are strategies, that everything on paper is, seems quite organized. But in real life, when I talk about gender, when I talk about LDC position, the emission targets, and blah, 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 that's, that's all right. But when I talk about the special vulnerability of men and women, then people says, oh, okay, yeah, it's of course you talk about gender. So it's like it's automatically comes that way, but it doesn't, right? We see many women, they don't actually carry the messages. It's even many men professionals, men colleagues of ours, they do very sensible interventions. They do very sensible research on women issues. So it's not only women, it's just an advantage that we have been experiencing through. That's an added advantage, but that it doesn't guarantee that you become an women activist. And the thing is, what I found, that government thinks that it's gender, women, oh, it's quite natural, and we know all about it. For example, I can give you one interesting example. I have so many examples to share. I travel a lot, and I love to be connected with rural people. Once I visited Isla affected area. Isla was hit in the south coastal belt in Bangladesh in 2009, and I was in an evaluation team. So we actually visited that place. Before visiting that place, that's an embankment which was completely disrupted, washed away, and people without having any shelter within the embankment, they needed to relocate, very quickly, and the part of the embankment was salvaged, and this, started living on them. That's a very tiny little width of embankment. All we know about the embankments, right? So before going there, visiting there, I started talking to local administration, and in that place, in that meeting, the civil society representatives, the NGO representatives, and all other ministry people, departmental government officials were there. And the top local administrator was, kind of saying that, look, we have done enough. We have given them that much of money. They have received that, and they're good. I visited them on a weekly holiday on last Friday, and I saw people, had their cows slaughtered, and they're having their girls' wedding with festivity. So things are, things are okay all over. One NGO activist, a lady, stood up, raised her hand, and said, "This is the Upojila, we call it Upojila, the local level governance. This is the first ever Upojila in Bangladesh who declared 100% sanitary coverage. And after that storm, the whole wash system is gone away, because it is the embankment they are living on, and on embankment which is already bruised, and every time the water is coming and recedes, no toilet can be re-established over there. And women at young age, because there is no toilet facilities, they are having contraceptive to check their monthly period, monthly menstrual cycle, and taking that risk on their reproductive health. And the local administrator, I acknowledge that he gave the money he promised, and people said they received, but it didn't notice that there is a huge gap in sanitation, which is very important for women, not for women's being as well. Being a reproductive health, it needs to be that administration's duty to address. And the festivity he was referring to, the government is promoting girls' child education with providing them free stipend. And in such disastrous events, we can see that, people becomes poorer, and the poorer family are forced to get their daughters, married in their early years, and that has huge social impact. So we actually miss that. The administrator having all the honesty, so to say, in disbursing money, that's not corruption. But he missed all the nitty-gritty detail that is important. Money is what for? Money is for life. Money is for my family. Money is for my well-being. And if that well-being is missing, I can't provide that service. Money doesn't help me, in a much better way. If I don't have the access to shelter, if I don't have the access to protection, if I don't have the access to education, if I don't have the access to sanitation, there is no meaning having, some thousands of taka in hand, So that's to cut short the last example. I hope that would be more interesting because it's a global thing. We are very good in cyclone warning. We are very good like a cyclone warning system. In 1991, we lost 0.3 million people for the same intensity of cyclone. Actually, we don't lose people right now. And we made cyclone shelters in the coastal belt. And we made, it's a two-storied building. One for the first story, there is nothing. We allow water to recede. That comes with the cyclone, the surge. And the second floor, the first floor, people go and take refuge. And the only toilet that is established in the ground floor where nothing is, there. People are on the first floor and the toilet is in the ground floor. And I ask women, why didn't you go during the cyclone? You received the cyclone warning, right? So say, I don't know whether I need to take refuge for 3 hours or 3 days without having the toilet, which is actually submerged in a cyclone time. I don't know, whether I can use that toilet. So for me, it's an important thing. It's just engineering structure that the engineers actually
I'm afraid the internet connection has gone down a little bit over there, but I have actually covered a few floods and cyclones, and I happened to be in 2008 when Cyclone Nargis hit Myanmar. And at that time, I remember a lot of women who had died, a lot of women who were complaining about the same access to sanitation, access to toilets, access to sanitary pads. And then I later checked that out of all the people who had died, where more than 100,000 people had died at that time, 61% happened to be women. And that is the sad reality, that disaster strikes men and women in different ways. But again, I think now that Laxmi is over here, what would be interesting is in a place like Nepal, especially in Mustang, where women are supposed to be much more economically free. I assume that working with men, especially when it comes to having direct policy issues and tackling policies on sustainable tourism to sustainable agriculture, it must be quite challenging. Would it be a small word? How do you see it?
Well, I find it's still challenging, even though like most of the women does the house activities as well as the tourism activities in the regions, and they contribute lots of times in the economic as well as social or other activities. But still, in the process of making decisions, they are always low. There is always below. And which is, I feel very sad, is I went to a university in the Western world, and when I come back and I have one examples that to conceptualize theme park, I was working. I have to promote a tourism product. This is kind of new tourism product. But then that was I have lots of challenges. This is last year, which I did. And this is a very big challenges, because they told me that I'm disqualified for this one, ineligible, because I'm not in the process of in the decision making in the village. And that's why I feel very angry. And I said, okay, I'm a woman, but I am a citizen of Nepal, and the fund has come from Nepal government, and I'm going to make it. So also somehow I fought, and then there was lots of obstacles by men and the village, and they like brainwash, oh, women cannot do, women cannot come up. And then I feel like, okay, I'm just going up. I'm just doing my conceptualize as a certain selfie path. This is the, and where I'm putting all my our traditional products which are available in Mustang, just like saligram, ammonite fossils, and that is only available in Mustang. So this is sacred land, and I have got lots of conceptual, and I work, and it's success. So after that, the people are here like little bit hope on me and the women's. I'm feeling still very sad for the people, the women in the Mustang region. They are still suppressed by their voice, are still suppressed, which is one of the most challenging in Mustang, even though like they contribute lots of times in tourism sectors. Also, they're doing business, and they're handling the international tourism and domestic. But still, in the matter of village decision making, they are still very under the very below list.
Thank you very much. I think one of the, before we like totally run out of time, because I can ask a lot of questions to all of you because it's so fascinating. We do need to kind of go into talking a little bit about COVID. I mean, with COVID, for the first time ever, we had negative oil prices. And is there a possibility of a reversal in terms of the rapid climate change? And what do you think? What should the ideal new norm be? Should we start with Fozia?
Sure. Yeah, that's a very interesting question. And I think what we are looking at right now is a very short-term outcome. And as someone who knows climate science, I think we should look at it as a long-term impact. Anything that we're looking at, we should make sure that if we're looking at a primary pollutant, we are aware of the secondary pollutants that would come later in this discussion. So for example, right after COVID, we heard and saw so many stories going viral about how our air is clean, how our water bodies are becoming clean. But we need to understand that this cleanliness, this cleansing, this transition is temporary. It is not going to stay like that forever. We also read and heard and saw researchers share with us that the ozone in the stratosphere is increasing or it's healing, and that's why now the ultraviolet radiation should not be able to come to us. So that would have improved the environment a little bit. But I think there's so many issues associated with COVID-19 as well. And instead of, I think, improving the environment, we are harming it already a lot more. And I think there is a fear that we might end up harming it more. Because if you look at COVID-19's relation with wildlife management, you will see that because of less patrolling, and because of, for example, in my village, lesser licenses for people from outside to come and trophy hunt and give money to the community, to the local community, what has ended up happening is that a lot of people are hunting these species that are at the verge of extinction. So because of less patrolling, that is happening all around the world, and it is an established fact. Number one. Number two, we think that the air quality has improved, yet it has for the smoke or the particulate matter 2.5. But the truth is that if you look at some of the other scientific studies, you would see that the nitrogen dioxide and the ozone concentrations are increasing, which we know that because of the industrial shutdown and the vehicular emission being stopped, the smog level or the particulate matter level has come down, but the air quality hasn't yet improved. I think it will only improve if we continuously change our actions into the ones that are more environment friendly. And similarly, there are other aspects that are associated to it as well, such as agriculture. You would imagine that now there would be more demand for food, and therefore perhaps for smaller farmers, life would be better. But we have seen that with climate science and with this locust problem with Iran, India, and Pakistan, people are saying that this is actually a bigger threat to people than COVID-19. So I think it's bigger and broader than just a small scale change that we are seeing right now. It's going to take a lot of human intervention and human responsibility for us to step up and say that we've been doing things wrong since now, whether it's climate activism, whether it's anything else. So I think one thing that is also positive is the fact that we're having this discussion on a virtual medium right now. So less traveling, right? Less air traveling. We're having this discussion, and so we have cut down the carbon dioxide emission a little bit. So it has in a way given us a new direction to maybe carry our conversations in future, because before this we've liked to even carry climate conversations with thousands of delegates coming from all across the world with all that carbon dioxide emission that is a part of it, and people asking whether you're actually working towards, because I have been a part of meetings where we have all the ACs on and the temperature is really, really down, talking about how can we stop climate change in Pakistan. And that sort of makes you question your existence in that room and your value to the discussion that you're having. So they're both positive and negative ways to look at it. I would like to end it with one thing. I think in my region, for example, it has both negative and positive implications. So as Laxmi would know, in our region as well, there's been a lot of economic boost because of local tourism, and that is completely halted right now. So there's literally no means of income. People who had businesses, the businesses are shut down. People who used to travel here and there to do small businesses, that is shut down. And so we have very little means of income at the moment. But it is also a blessing in a way that everyone who was living outside of the region has come back to the region. And the little agricultural land that we had, which we were ignoring, which was our only source of income long ago, has now become a source of income for us again. It has become a source of livelihood and food for us again. So now you see that the entire family is going out to work on the little piece of land that they have. And this year I saw that because of the Clean and Green Pakistan initiative, we received a lot of trees. And because multiple male members were in the house, they could walk longer distances, they could drive longer distances, and more trees were put in my village than before. So I think they're both positive and negative ways to look at it, and I would like to highlight both. So that's what I think.
I think Sharmind, one of the things that people are floating is like why COVID-19 happened. So do you believe that the COVID pandemic is a result of environmental change, and does that even make sense? And how does it relate to environmental activism in the future? Is there an upside, like the negative oil prices that happened for a while? And how difficult has it made it for you to advance your work?
Thank you for asking. I don't see actually any relationship between COVID-19 and environmental change, that environmental change triggers this COVID-19 situation. But the interesting thing is, as we are all locked down and living in Dhaka, in the most densely populated city, and in a small apartment where we can see the skies and the greenery, and the perks are not available, the people now can understand that you need to have open spaces, you need to have greenery, and you need to care about the nature. The best part of it is here. The lives we are in very dangerous situation in Bangladesh, especially in Dhaka and the vicinity areas. The situation is grieving actually. Still, apart from lives, lives doesn't, nothing is comparable to lost lives. Apart from lost lives, the economic loss is huge, and it's people are losing their employment, not within the domestic sphere, also from the overseas as well, as the prices of oil are going down. Many of our people are working in the Middle East and the European cities and our European agriculture side and all that. They started coming back. So it's a huge impact. And in terms of climate change, when we talk about resilience, we often go to small farm holders, small female farmers, that you need to understand about the climate vulnerability and the climate resilient crop varieties and all that. You need to build up your cultivation on that. And, these tiny little smallholders, they are now losing their livelihoods. They don't have anything to, the distribution channel is disrupted. We have dairy hubs. They don't have, anything to distribute right now. So this kind of losses, this disrupt the resilience building process. So it's quite worrisome that our process is disrupting, and we need to be with them with special stimulus packages, and we don't know how far this will continue. So we need to make contingency plans, and we need to be with them with resources, with different protocols, to build upon their resilience.
You know what? I mean, I have such a long list, but I've just been told that we're almost out of time. Who would have thought about that? Thank you so much for this really enlightening and such a timely conversation. I hope quite a few future environmentalists will tune in, and in fact, it would be great if everyone tuning in ends up being an environmentalist. Thanks to British Council for getting me involved. Personally, I'm going home much wiser. Stay safe and stay healthy. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.